The planning window allows us to set up our stage so we can work better. For example, we can switch the background from a working background to a game background, so we can see how the level would look like in game. You just click that button again and it turns off and you're back here. Where you're in the other background, in the default editor background, you can actually personalize the color. And this is a standard color picker which you can use. You can change red, green and blue separately. You can move the window. You can also revert to whatever the previous color was by clicking the revert button. And these other buttons work the way I showed you before. So I'm going to stick with this dark theme because I like to work with dark themes, but you could, very well prefer a bright theme. It's really up to you. Clicking anywhere makes the window go away and confirm your choice. Now we have a grid button which tells us that it's visible at the moment. If we click it, it goes away. If you click it, the grid is back. We can zoom in and out to see it more closely if you want to, like that. We can also change the grid resolution with these buttons. We can go down grid resolutions, or I suppose up, meaning we have a much more dense grid, or a less dense grid. This will come in handy later. We can also click the button in the middle to cycle through them, going right. Further, there's also shortcuts for this. We can use the minus and plus keys to increase or decrease the resolution. One more thing we can do is we can change the color of the grid as well, if we prefer. So if you want to have a bright color, like for example this red, or I don't know, some kind of yellow, that would work too. You can also change its transparency, lowering it to this being its minimum value and the maximum value here, right? And this obviously applies to a more dense grid as well. Okay, now if I revert now, it's going to revert to whatever I left before as opposed to what I had originally. So I'm going to go back to something very, very dark. Again, that's how I like to work. We can also sort of quickly change the alpha, the transparency, using this little slider over here. Just click on it and drag it. Now one last thing we can do is we can put the grid in front or behind the architecture. Now I would need to explain to you what the architecture is before we worry about these buttons, but essentially these buttons will make the grid either be drawn in front of this architecture thing or behind it. And this is a perfect segue for me to actually move on to the architecture section of the editor.